While many of the vicious battles undertaken in World War II saw decisive victories, with armies of men, fleets of warships, and squadrons of aircraft pitted against one another in mortal combat, one of the most desperate was a short skirmish that took place in the vast Indian Ocean off the west coast of Australia between two ships, the HMAS Sydney and the German Auxiliary Cruiser Komoran. The battle should have gone to the Sydney, a heavily armed cruiser, while the Kormoran, as a merchant raider, was lightly defended by comparison, but instead, during a violent 30-minute fight for survival, the Kormoran claimed a pyric victory over its enemy, but in so doing sent over 700 men to their deaths on the turbulent ocean waves. On the side of the Allies during the confrontation was HMAS Sydney, pennant number D48, a battle-hardened ship of the line that had seen prior conflict in the British Mediterranean Fleet for an 8-month deployment, during which she sank 2 Italian warships, participated in multiple shore bombardments, and provided support to the Malta convoys, while receiving minimal damage and no casualties. The second warship to carry the name Sydney, the first being the famous town-class light cruiser that defeated the SMS Emden at the Battle of Cocos in November 1914, the ship was a member of the Leander-class, having been built by Swan Hunter of Wallsend, England, and commissioned in September 1935, being armed with 8 6-inch Mark 23 guns, 4 4-inch quick-firing Mark 5 guns, 12 0.5-inch Vickers Mark 3 machine guns, 14 .303-inch Lewis machine guns, and 8 21-inch deck-mounted torpedo tubes. On the side of the Axis forces was the German Auxiliary Cruiser Komoran, pennant number HSK-8, a former Hamburg America Line merchant vessel that had been requisitioned by the Kriegsmarine at the start of World War II, before she had been commissioned for civilian service under her original name, the Steiermark. Launched in 1938, the vessel was hastily fitted with 6 15cm SK-L45C guns, 2 3.7cm PAC 36 anti-tank guns, 5 2cm Flak 30 anti-aircraft guns, 6 torpedo tubes, 24 53.3cm torpedoes, and nearly 400 EMC and TMB naval mines, the original merchantman design of the vessel being used as part of a raiding campaign against other merchant vessels or to sneak through enemy blockades. In the run-up to the battle in 1941, the Sydney had returned to Australia for a refit, and was now to be dispatched on the comparatively easy convoy escort missions in the Indian Ocean. The Kormoran, meanwhile, had snuck out of Germany in December 1940, and escaped into the Atlantic via the North Sea and the Denmark Strait, after which she sank 7 merchant ships and captured an 8th, before sailing into the Indian Ocean in April 1941, after which she intercepted a further 3 merchant ships. The intention was for the Kormoran to lay hundreds of sea mines along the Australian coast west of Perth, before returning to Germany in 1942, but had to abandon its mission when reports came in that the HMAS Canberra was moving to intercept. To avoid detection as a German raider, the ship adopted the colours and name of Dutch merchantman Straat-Malacca, and at the time was carrying 399 personnel under the command of Fregatenkapitein, or Commander, Theodor Detmers. On November 19th, around 1600 hours, the Kormoran, still under the guise of the Straat-Malacca, caught sight of what appeared to be a sailing vessel on the high seas west of Carnarvon, but upon closer inspection, soon found she had encountered the HMAS Sydney on patrol, carrying 645 men and officers under the command of Captain Joseph Burnett. Captain Burnett was a career officer of the Royal Australian Navy, having graduated as midshipman from the Royal Australian Naval College on New Year's Day 1917, before seeing service in the latter stages of World War I. Commander Detmers, meanwhile, had joined the Reichsmarine in 1921, and had been transferred between a variety of German warships and training vessels, before seeing action between April and June 1940 during Operation Weserübung, the mission to occupy the Kingdom of Norway. Having caught sight of the disguised Kormoran, Sydney moved in to intercept the vessel, but upon seeing it coming under the name Straat-Malacca, a vessel Burnett was familiar with, he did not perceive any immediate danger, or while the Kormoran quietly readied her weapons. It was at this point that Burnett's overconfidence in the legitimacy of the Kormoran's disguise sacrificed the Sydney's main battlefield advantage, her range and speed, the ship having been conditioned for long-range bombardments of enemy vessels and targets, rather than close-quarter combat, and as the two vessels were only within 4,300 feet of each other, the Kormoran was now largely below her firing range. Moving closer, the Sydney first signalled for the freighter's name, followed by a request for her destination, port of origin, and cargo, to which the Kormoran responded, before being asked to provide a secret Allied password, one that the Kormoran was obviously unaware of, but was now within such easy firing range of the cruiser that there was no need to maintain her ruse any longer. Kormoran's response was curt, as dropping away various plates, covers and housings, the ship revealed her true nature, hoisting the Kriegsmarine battle ensign and blasting the Sydney with a volley of machine gun, torpedo and anti-aircraft fire. The Sydney's hull and deck were riddled, and the cruiser promptly retaliated, but due to the range being far too close, the first salvo passed harmlessly over the top of the Kormoran, and before Sydney could reload, a second salvo from the German raider had destroyed the bridge and fire control centre, likely killing Captain Burnett in the process. In the time taken for the Sydney to reload for her second barrage, the Kormoran was able to answer with 3 further salvos, before eventually responding with a series of attacks that damaged the raider's guns and machinery spaces, sparking an oil fire. Sydney took another critical blow when a round of torpedoes struck the forward sonar room, causing water to flood the bow and drag the cruiser into the ocean, followed by 2 more salvos that destroyed the cruiser's forward turrets. With her aft turrets jammed, and water now pouring into the forward spaces, the Sydney was rendered defenceless, thus forcing her to withdraw south in order to try and reach the mainland. But as a last act of defiance, she launched 2 further torpedoes at the Kormoran, which, due to a quick manoeuvre by Detmers, passed harmlessly astern. The Kormoran had won, but just barely, as by now the uncontrolled oil fire was ravaging the ship's engine room, leaving the vessel dead in the water. Regardless, the raider continued to defend herself, firing round after round at the retreating Sydney until the latter had dropped out of range, proceeding with what little power and control she had south towards the mainland, both down by the bow and on fire. For the rest of the evening, the burning Sydney could be sighted from the Kormoran, even after it had passed over the horizon, a lasting glow filling the night sky until around midnight, after which, at some point, the vessel foundered, taking all the surviving crew to the depths. The crew of the Kormoran, meanwhile, struggled on into the night to contain the inferno, until Detmers ordered the survivors to abandon ship before the flame reached her cargo of mines. Half an hour after the remains of her 399 crew had escaped to the lifeboats, the sea mines and ammo stores of the Kormoran ignited, blowing the abandoned raider apart and sending her to the bottom in minutes, all while Detmers and his crew were left helpless on the blackened Indian Ocean. The loss of the Sydney was not suspected by the Royal Australian Navy, as it wasn't uncommon for warships of her class to be delayed during their patrols, but after the ship had failed to arrive in Fremantle by November 23rd, and having been unable to raise the cruiser on the wireless, a search and rescue mission commenced the following day. As this mission was organised, the first survivors of the Kormoran were picked up by the troopship RMS Aquitania at 0600 on November 23rd, the crew of which did not realise that the German sailors had survived a vicious confrontation with an Australian cruiser, and therefore not reporting the capture of German sailors until November 26th, due to a requirement to maintain radio silence. The next day, another of the Kormoran's lifeboats was picked up by the tanker Trocus, followed by other lifeboats and rafts being sighted by the Naval Search and Rescue Mission, or by fishermen and patrol craft, while some crew members made landfall around Quobba Station, approximately 37 miles north of Carnarvon, where they surrendered without incident. Eventually, on November 29, 1941, after surviving crewmen from the Kormoran, including Detmers, were recovered and explained to the Royal Australian Navy under interrogation that they had been engaged in a mutually destructive skirmish with a cruiser they believed to be the Sydney, rescue efforts were called off, with the only recovered item of the cruiser being an inflatable RAN lifebelt. Following their capture, the crew of the Kormoran were distributed across POW camps in Australia, with one sailor dying on March 24, 1942, while Detmers and 19 other Axis officers escaped from the Durringale homestead in January 1945 using a tunnel, but were promptly recaptured. Finally, on February 21, 1947, the surviving crewmen were returned to Germany aboard the steamship Orontes, the great irony being that berthed next to the liner in the harbour at Port Phillip Bay was the Straatmalacher. For his efforts, Detmers was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, and, after suffering a stroke during captivity, continued to live in Hamburg, writing about his experiences on the Kormoran until his death on November 4, 1976 at the age of 74, while the Sydney was posthumously granted the battle honour Kormoran 1941, to recognise the fatal damage the cruiser inflicted on the raider. While early attempts were made to seek out the wreck site of the Sydney and Kormoran, it wasn't until March 12, 2008, after nearly a decade of organisation and various unsuccessful searches, that the bifurcated remains of the Kormoran were found at a depth of 8,400 feet, followed 5 days later, and only hours after the finding of the Kormoran had been announced, by the discovery of the HMAS Sydney's wreck at a depth of 8,000 feet below the surface, the distance of the bow from the rest of the ship, approximately 1,600 feet, illustrating that during the night it had detached from the vessel, thus causing the cruiser to sink in a matter of minutes. Today, the mutual destruction of the Sydney and the Kormoran continues to stir controversy, not only because of Captain Burnett's apparent overconfidence that the disguised raider was a genuine merchantman, so much so that he was willing to sacrifice his only battlefield advantage by drawing too close to an unconfirmed vessel, but also on the part of Detmers, who apparently broke battlefield convention by firing his weapons before he had struck his false Dutch flag and raised his battle ensign. Suggestion also exists that a Japanese submarine operating in the area could have helped to finish off the Sydney, or that, because there were no survivors from the cruiser, these were either executed by the German crew while they were in the water, which was proven false by the neutral Chinese laundry detail of the Kormoran, or captured by the as-theorized Japanese submarine. Nevertheless, while the exact circumstances under which the Sydney foundered will likely remain a mystery, the battle between itself and the Kormoran was perhaps the most brutal and tragic of the war in the Indian Ocean, but at the same time proved both flaws and triumphs in the way each vessel was commanded.